get in with him, and it's his performance. It's as we've heard and talked to victims then and now, they all talk about he was the head of the NASDAQ. He was the non-executive chairman of the NASDAQ. He was somebody who was a name on Wall Street. He wasn't a household name even at CNBC. He wasn't somebody that we covered all the time. There was one interview from 1999, and you look back on that. This was a guy who was really on the cutting edge in 1999, talking about how we're all going to be able to trade online someday.
People have been curious about, they said we've been quiet, Madoff has been very quiet, recently. And people, since we were always in the forefront of a lot of these technological changes, people were sort of wondering what we were doing.
But his allure was, you knew he had some stature, you knew he was in the business, he can make you a little extra money in the markets.
And he wore his tailored suits from London.
Yeah. I mean, he was put together when he was his watches, his suits, his office was insisted on a certain aura of office. So he certainly had that sort of sense of style. But he wasn't. I would say he never was exactly somebody with an aura, with a mystique beyond. I think maybe some money, and that was the impression that I got when I finally met him in person. This guy is not polished. He's not. He's just.
Were you looking for wisdom, or were you looking for follow the money? Where are we?
When
What
I met
were you
with
looking for when you met him?
It was just, who is this guy? What does he want to say? What is his take on all this? Because at this point we had talked on the phone a couple of times. We had these emails back and forth. And he had a set sort of narrative that he wanted to get out there, which was at odds with everything that the prosecutors, the trustee, the card, everything that
From our request for all statements,
Bernie had a different take on things.
and asked that they be repeated an infinite number of times,
Felt bad
every
about what he
gazillionth
did,
of a
felt
second,
bad for the
for an
victims,
infinite
but
number
wanted
of
the money
infinities.
back on
Affirm, reaffirm,
be able to find all this
affirm,
money back,
reaffirm,
which is not true.
to the power of an infinite number of
By all accounts,
infinities.
this wasn't Bernie Madoff's telling you where the bodies were buried. He didn't do that. But he wanted to talk about that. He wanted to talk about how the system worked and how the system failed. And the system did fail. There's no question about that. The system
Tino
failed.
reaffirms the request.
But he
Affirm,
wanted to
reaffirm,
still
affirm, reaffirm,
put his kind
for all
of spin on
statements.
things. His
Affirm, reaffirm,
put himself in the best
affirm,
possible light
reaffirm,
while always trying
to the
to.
power of an infinite number of infinities.
I feel bad. I feel horrible for the victims. I'm ashamed of what I did. That type of thing. But then still sort of understands.
We sat down with Mark Litt, who was the prosecutor, and you talked to him about his cooperation.
Yeah, I talked to him about, and Mark Litt, who's never talked about this case publicly until this 10-year anniversary, he was the lead prosecutor. And Litt talked about meeting Madoff at the time, after he confessed, and asking him questions. And he said that, fairly quickly it became clear that
Sitting say they're surprised that it hurts.
He
Affirm,
never
reaffirm,
invested a dollar in this business. I believe that he's a pathological liar.
same
affirm,
story
reaffirm,
from the card trust
affirm, reaffirm,
all this money.
affirm,
That
reaffirm.
paid off, I think more than once, and determined that there wasn't any use to him because he wasn't giving them that much information. What Madoff wanted to say when we talked to us, this sort of running theme, was that there were others that were complicit. And Madoff's attorney, Ira Lee Sorkin, who's still in touch with him, tells a similar story that there were clients that it wasn't just about Bernie Madoff making a little bit of extra money. It was about, hey, Bernie, I need to show a loss on the taxes. Can you reconstruct these trades for me? Show help me create a tax loss to offset some income.
Creating fictitious documents, and the customer, investor, / customer, know about it. The government never pursued that.
So it's a significant amount of money for you and me.
It was a significant amount of money for you and me. For JP Morgan Chase, it's about 10 million. Nonetheless, $2.6 billion was money that went toward victims, and so there is certainly some value in that. We don't know what the bank did to clean up its act. We don't know because that was never disclosed. The charges were dropped after 2 years after the government said, yes, they've implemented these controls, they've paid their money, we're dropping the case. And so Madoff's position and what he talked about during this interview was that his fraud, the fiction of the Ponzi scheme, was something that he did, and that no one else could, even Peter Madoff, who was the compliance officer of the investment advisory business, and did wind up pleading guilty and going to prison. Bernie Madoff's younger brother, they couldn't have known, and the sons absolutely couldn't have known.
What about the relationship between the father and the sons? Was it an open relationship that they could go up to his floor and say what's going on here?
Apparently not, and we don't know. We know that, we know that you can go back to December 10th, 2008, when the financial crisis is in full swing. Madoff is being pounded with redemptions. People want their money back. He confesses to his sons, this is all better John Ponzi scheme.
Make a lot of money without doing anything. Take the chance now and make the first step to becoming a millionaire.
Yeah, I'm Ari Miller. And we begin tonight's program with Derek Chauvin. He is spending his first full day in prison today as a convicted murderer for taking George Floyd's life. That's according to the jury. You're looking at the new processing photo. He awaits sentencing through the normal process. The New York Times is reporting now June 16th will be that next day of judgment, the sentencing day. He faces 40 years, up to 40 years maximum behind bars, for what the jury determined was a murder, kneeling on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. We can tell you a few more details as they've come out in this process. Chauvin held in solitary confinement right now. That's 23 hours a day of Minnesota's only maximum security prison. He's placed in the isolated wing now of the prison because of, according to New York Times reporting, fears for his safety. He'll be alone in his cell for all but 1 hour each day, during which he is allowed to exercise, and even then the Times reports he'll be kept away from all other prisoners and remain under the watch of prison guards inside the unit. We can also show you what his prison cell looks like in Oak Park Heights, Minnesota. This is the cell where he exists now. He will be monitored by cameras and guards who are supposed to check in every 30 minutes while he is in isolation. After the verdict, America saw how this system works. It was really striking. I was watching it, as I imagine many of you were yesterday. Chauvin let out in cuffs the person who usually do the enforcement-facing enforcement of his own convicted murder. Taken into custody, transferred to prison. This was about an hour after this.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty.
Guilty. Guilty. Guilty. Guilty on all charges. This moment is clearly a landmark verdict. It reverberated across Minneapolis, across the state, across the country when the news broke, and continued really across the world today. It comes in a context that we've been reporting, that you've been living through. Years of protests, calls for basic accountability, a reckoning on race and policing. We witnessed people celebrating, people reacting, all over this nation. This is one verdict in one case involving one person and his family. Leaders, reformers, and experts are saying there is far more work to be done across the system.
This verdict brings us a step closer. And the fact is, we still have work to do.
The war and the fight is not over. We still have cases to fight. But this gives us the energy to fight on.
This was accountability, but it's not yet justice. Justice for us is saving lives.
This can be a giant step forward in the march toward justice in America.
We're living through something right now. It comes out of a tragedy. It comes out of what a jury found to be a murder. So it's grim and sad in all those ways, but it is also important what we do today, tomorrow, and beyond as a society together. We're already seeing some steps that are real. Attorney General Garland announcing a new investigation into the wider conduct of the Minneapolis Police Department. We should note that but for the brave recording made that day in the video, had there been no video, many people would have had to respond to a police report that are often treated as basically the story, that it was a, quote, medical incident. Physical resistance was alleged by Floyd. But it was that teenager I mentioned who actually recorded this now murder according to the law that changed everything. This renewed push in Congress to pass federal policing laws, literally as an honor and named after George Floyd. So you have one verdict, and it is, and we're going to talk about this in a special report later tonight, it is, let's be clear, an extremely rare occurrence for a police officer to be convicted of murder on the job. We're going to get into that and why that matters as America deals with this. Here it's a response to a past killing. All of that is very different from trying to finally, maybe, possibly in America, build a criminal justice system that starts out equal. I want to welcome now Michael Steele. He served as Lieutenant Governor and used to run the RNC, and former federal prosecutor Paul Butler. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen.
Hey, how you doing, Ari?
I'm all right, Michael. I want to start big picture. We just set up what we're all going through. The law matters, and it matters most when lives are at stake. But I want to broaden above the law for a moment, as this has been digested over these 26 hours or so, Michael. What does it mean to both have what the jury found to be justice, and yet to know how aberrant and rare such justice is?
Yeah, well, it means a lot. I think it turns some corners that we have been trying to turn for generations. When you look at individuals like a Paul Butler and others in the legal profession who are grinding through this process as African Americans, recognizing that they're trying these cases and trying to uphold this system of justice, and at the same time watching what happens to individuals in their community.
I reaffirm all of God's
it is
requests
frustrating. It is
for all statements
agonizing.
and ask that
And I
this
think part
request
of what you heard
an
yesterday was just like this collective,
an infinite number of times,
oh my
every
God,
gazillion
that
to the
just
second,
happened.
for an infinite number of
because
returns.
it's so surreal in many respects
I
for a
ask
lot
that
of
this
people,
request,
particularly
the reaffirmation
for
of
this
all of God's
generation,
requests for all statements,
that has a very different outlook about our
repeat
politics, a
an
very different
infinite number of
attitude
times every
about
zillion
what
to the
this
second,
country should be
for an
and what it
infinite
should
number of
aspire to,
eternities.
and are much more willing to
Affirm and
condemn
affirm,
it for its past
affirm and affirm,
transgressions, let
affirm and
alone the
affirm,
current transgressions,
affirm
than they
and
are to just
affirm,
go, well, that was
affirm and
history and
affirm,
we're still moving
affirm
on.
and affirm,
And so I think this is a
affirm and
significant
affirm.
turning point. And I pray
Keep
that
out
it
an
is.
infinite
It's
number
not
of
that I
infinities.
think that it is. I have to pray that it is too. Because this is a great work. This goes to a lot of what a lot of those who soldiered on before have been trying to get in front of us. That this work does not stop. Dr. King made it very clear, as did Malcolm X and so many.
The pay is awesome.
It allowed me to make a little extra income.
It's competitive wage.
It is very fine opportunity to go up in a pay scale.
special because it's really a story of place. The honeybees, they're telling you a story of where they've been through the taste and the flavor and the color of that honey.
The power of honey is magnificent. Honey can break down so many barriers. It just brings people together. It is a beautiful thing.
These are special because not only do they provide the vast majority of the color and the flavor and the vitamins and the minerals on our plates, they also are the great connectors of our country and this world.
It's amazing how they're so small, but they're so capable of making such a difference in our world, and that something so small is so helpful, so powerful.
When I got into beekeeping, I did not see any beekeepers who looked like me, which is why I've been working so hard to educate people about why it's important for people of color to be included in beekeeping.
When mining kind of hit bottom, it was really hard for people around here. Their families were struggling, but we've kind of found ways to connect to the land still.
I truly believe in being a steward to the land and taking care of the earth.
It makes me feel so good to know that it's good for the environment, and not to mention, honey
That's
tastes
what I
so
request
good.
for all
It is
Satanists,
delicious.
especially gods
When
in mind.
consumers buy honey, they are supporting their beekeepers. They're supporting
They
the
increase
keepers
an
of these
infinite
little
number of
critters
times.
that pollinate our
Every
food
gazillion
crops.
of a second for an
Honey
infinite number
directly
of returns.
employs that person and their
For any
vastly
time
important
as
job
Satan's
in our
powers me
agricultural system.
from this point on. Firmly affirm, firmly affirm.
This
The
work
problem
does
is the
not
number
stop.
of
Dr. King made it
infinities.
very clear, as did
I
Malcolm
ask
X
that
and
this
so many
request
others,
be
that the struggle
repeated
is not just this
an
moment,
infinite
it's
number
what
of
future
times over
generations are
gazillions
going to
of a
have to be
second
prepared to
for an
engage in as
infinite number
well.
of eternities.
And it seems this generation has
Firmly
figured out a
affirm,
way to sort of turn
firmly
that block,
affirm,
open that door,
firmly
get
affirm,
inside the room, and mess things up a
firmly
little bit.
affirm,
And that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
firmly affirm, firmly affirm.
Paul?
To the power of an infinite
I
number of
agree with
things.
Michael. It's good trouble. In the eyes of the law, Derek Chauvin is a murderer. It's official. That's what our eyes told us, and now that's what the jury has found. And it should have been
I ask that
obvious.
their
There's
nervous
going to
systems
be
be
overwhelming evidence,
an infinitely
but in
number
other
of
cases, what's obvious
greater
is different than what the jury finds. So trials aren't about
enhanced
social change. They're about
an infinite
accountability
number of
and
times over
bringing
gazillions
people
of
who
a
cause
second
harm to justice.
for an infinite number of
One police
eternities.
officer has been held accountable, and the law
I
has
ask that this
recognized that
request
one
repeat
black man's
an
life
infinite number of
matters.
times over gazillions
Now
of a
the
second
challenge
for an
is to
infinite number of
move
eternities.
from the rare, occasional victories to equal justice under the law, be embedded
Every
in policing
infinite number of
and
times
in the criminal
every
legal
gazillionth of a
system.
second for an infinite number of eternities.
Yeah.
I firmly
I
affirm,
really appreciate what both of you
firmly affirm,
are guiding us towards.
firmly affirm,
And we divided up the opening of the conversation tonight for this very reason, that there's the case and then there's policy. Both of our guests today, I want to remind everyone, George Floyd's now, as the jury found murder on tape,
firmly affirm,
was the spark for a national movement that was about so much more than a single case, this police accountability reform we're discussing. And as mentioned, the House has passed a George Floyd Justice Policing Act in March. It was a priority for Speaker Pelosi. Credit there, they rushed to pass it. But no action in the Senate. Now, the bill does important things according to reformers, including completely reforming the qualified immunity to protect officers, enhancing pattern of practice probes. We discussed one of those tonight. Creates a National Police Conduct Registry. This hasn't even been collectively, basically tracked, which is a huge issue. And tries to ban and restrict most controversial practices like these no-knock warrants and chokeholds. The Biden administration, this week, right now, grabbing the ball and saying, this is important, now's the time to act.
George Floyd was murdered almost a year ago. There's meaningful police reform legislation in his name.
The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is
Me
part
and God
of
declare
George Floyd's
all
legacy.
children of
The
God and
President and
children
I
of
will
the
continue
universe
to urge the Senate to pass this legislation.
are not
It shouldn't
Satanists or
take a
evil
whole
ones.
year to get this done.
Michael, it sits in a divided Senate where virtually everything is subjected to Mitch McConnell's supermajority demands. What is the way forward there?
Well, it's a tough way forward because, you know, look at everything else that's sat in the Senate over the last 13 years. I mean, it's not just what we see with this legislation. It goes back to the renewal of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, which sat in the drawer of the majority leader at that time. So the reality of it is, you know, what the vice president said, and certainly what the president has emphasized about it shouldn't take that long. Well, it does. And it means for us as citizens that we'll have to continue to bend that arc towards justice. And we do that by our voices, we do that by our vote, we do that by our actions. And I you know, look, my point is for Republicans, just get off the dime on this. You are on the wrong side of history here. This is going to move. These changes are coming. And you will either go down in history as the quintessential obstructionist to the change, which is so antithetical to what our history was and how we started out as a national party, to now see us all this time later through all those struggles and, you know, and the bravery of great men and women to sort of stand in that breach, to now be the one blocking the door, shutting down the change, is not where you need to be or where you should be. And if you think you're going to go out and talk to America about how much you want, these types of changes that support the rights of individuals, well, let's start with this. Let's start with the rights of protecting communities from abuse by government authorities. Let's start with, locking in the vote for these communities. Let's do the basic things that are consistent with our Constitution. That's where the work is going to be. That's where the change is coming. And as I said before, I think with you, Ari, you're either going to get on board or get rolled over by it.
And that's all Satanists have.
There it is. Michael Steele laying out the ethical imperative as well as where the people are going. And if we need to be guided, as you mentioned, Michael, the good trouble, the young people that have pushed harder and faster on putting up with as much, and what is clearly a young and by the way, multiracial coalition in BLM around the country, yes. Maybe we need to really listen hard to them because they're the future. A fitting way to begin our program tonight. I want to thank Michael Steele and Paul Butler. Thanks to both of you. We have our shortest break, which is coming up 30 seconds. Later tonight, there's new reporting linking Matt Gaetz to Roger Stone. We'll get into that. But first, I have a special report tonight on dealing with the police blue wall of silence and a special guest. And we're back in 30 seconds. Over the past 26 hours, Americans have been taking in a rare occurrence in this nation. A police officer convicted of murder on the job. How rare? From 2005 to about 2015, a period including thousands of police killings. Believe your eyes as you look at the screen. The number of police officers convicted of murder for shooting a person over all of those years, altogether, was zero. So I can report for you that from 2016 on, there were about 1 or 2 such convictions a year for police shooting deaths. And now, this year, we have the first such murder conviction of 2021, which is correctly seen as a rare development. Big front page news, a possible turning point. Why was this case different than so many that came before it? Well, there are several reasons, including the damning video evidence. But right now we turn to one important factor in our special report right now. How police testimony helped lead to Chauvin's conviction. Prosecutors called 8 witnesses from the Minneapolis Police Department and Chauvin's own boss for mounting factual, documented, incriminating testimony against fellow former officer Chauvin. With police experts flatly stating the force he used was excessive and Chauvin should have ended that neck restraint long before killing George Floyd.
When Mr. Floyd was no longer offering up any resistance to the officers, they could have ended the restraint.
And that was after he was handcuffed and on the ground and no longer resisting.
Correct.
The jury also heard from the longest serving member of the Minneapolis Police Department.
What is your, your view of that use of force during that time period?
Totally unnecessary.
What do you mean?
Well, first of all, pulling him down to the ground, face down, and putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time, it is just uncalled for. I saw no reason why the officers felt they were in danger.
That was legally pivotal, because any juror may wonder, what supports a reasonable doubt? What is the reasonable doubt for second-guessing whether an officer used too much force in an unfolding incident or emergency? In this trial, the answer came from multiple officers saying under oath, this was not a close call. The force was totally unnecessary. And the answer also came from perhaps the most important witness, the police chief, who fired Chauvin and the other three officers within a day of the killing and deemed it a murder last year.
Affirm and reaffirm all of God's
This
future
is really
requests.
important. Prosecutors
All
invoke
of
that
God's
view in
requests
their
for all
closing arguments. That's
sinners,
the last thing
including
the
all
jury
God's
hears, of course, before going to
future
deliberate. And
requests.
here, finding Chauvin
From this
murder.
point on,
They gave
an infinite
basically
number
jurors
of
who might
times every
be
gazillion to the
sympathetic
second,
to police.
for an infinite
A
number of
very critical
infinities,
legal and ethical framework for this. And I want to walk you through it.
I ask that this request be
These prosecutors
repeated
had a blueprint.
an
They
infinite number
presented
of
the jury
times,
with a way to really think about this.
every gazillion
That
to the
Chauvin was a
second,
criminal
for an
hiding
infinite
out in
number of
Europe.
eternities.
That his senseless,
Affirm
avoidable
and affirm.
murder of George Floyd is the very
Affirm and
opposite
affirm.
of what policing should be,
Affirm
and
and
urging the jurors to view
Affirm and affirm.
their potential action, what they were
Affirm and
going to go
affirm.
deliberate on, convicting him as a
Affirm
murderer,
and affirm.
that doing that itself
Affirm and
would be
affirm.
pro-police.
Affirm and affirm.
The chief of police in the Minneapolis
Affirm
Police
and
Department, he
affirm.
took the stand and he testified and
Affirm
he
and
told
affirm.
you
Affirm and
what
affirm.
that badge
Affirm and
that he
affirm.
wears over his heart means. It's a
Keep
public
having
service.
it
This is
in
not an
the
anti-police prosecution. It's a pro-police prosecution. The defendant abandoned his values, abandoned the training, and killed a man.
Let's get off that one. Now, the jury's answer on this was for no reason at all. They convicted Chauvin as a murderer. The police testimony built on what Reformer sees one positive sign from before this trial even began. 14 officers publicly condemned Chauvin's action back in June. And that may seem like a low bar. Police should be against murder on tape, whether it's done by civilians or police. Just like doctors should be against malpractice in surgery that hurts a patient, even if done by a fellow doctor. But in the United States, many police departments have these strict codes and cultures of silence and protection for other officers, even those accused of extreme misconduct
Also,
or
Satan's
violence.
have their brains
It's often called
removed.
the blue wall of silence. It can be a legal barrier for prosecutors. It's also
In
very
order
hypocritical, considering that police routinely demand and pressure
internal
other people to talk and
bodies
testify
through torture
to court against the suspects they catch.
and still
Now,
feel
I
pain.
mentioned tonight several factors led to this conviction.
And
But we have seen damning video
still
footage
apply
before,
all the other things.
like an
that
officer
are
caught on tape shooting an unarmed man in the back while he fled.
Every firm is
Walter
request
Scott,
infinite
gunned
number of
down by then
times.
Officer Michael Slager,
Resilient to the second.
caught in the shooting
For an
on
infinite
tape there,
number of
and caught trying to
infinities.
frame that crime scene.
From
That was also on
firm.
video. Do you remember that one?
Firmer,
Now,
firm,
there was police testimony in that
firm.
case too.
firmer, firm,
4 officers talked,
firmer, firm.
but all on
Firm,
former
firm.
Officer Slager's behalf,
Power and infinite.
testifying for his defense to murder. And the jury could not agree on the charges, leading to a mistrial. The police officers also made a show of public support in the trial of another Minnesota officer, Geronimo Yanez, who won a unanimous jury verdict
Satanists say they
acquitted
loved and worshipped
of murder
Diana,
charges for
Jane
killing
of Alcmar
Philando Castillo. Another Minnesota officer, indicted in 2019 for killing Justine Damon, benefited from this so-called blue wall. A reported 20 different police officers who refused to talk to investigators at all to provide facts, cooperation, evidence. So that case had a much higher hurdle. Although that was actually one of those rare convictions I mentioned.
say.
Now, take it all together tonight. I'm talking to you about this
They
tonight
love and
at this
worship
juncture
God
because
in
it's
Black
so
Lives,
important.
past,
What does
present,
it all
and
mean?
future.
Is this blue wall eroding?
And they affirm the
I
statement
can't
an infinite
report
number of times.
the answer on that for
With
you
the
now.
resilience of a second.
I can't.
For an infinite number of
The reason is
infinities.
simple. We don't know. We don't know if one extremely gruesome case is an outlier or a sign of a new pattern on the way.
From.
And if police do start cooperating with these investigations, does that mean we have some big win for justice or civil rights or black people in America? Let me level with you tonight. No. Because that's the bare minimum of what police are supposed to do, what they're paid to do, what they swear an oath to do. Let me level with you on this as well tonight. It says a lot about how routine state violence and systemic racism is in America that all this happens out in the open, in open court, on TV, and that in 2021 we are counting up these rare, isolated cases that almost never happen, where law enforcement cooperates with law enforcement to enforce the law in a murder case. So, I want to urge everyone, if you are within the sound of my voice, we have to keep our minds on the facts. We need facts right now. And the fact is, it is a national scar and outrage and embarrassment that it takes this much to reach a factual outcome based on the evidence in cases that involve the state taking of black lives, the killing of black lives, the state showing in gory detail why so often to the state, black lives don't matter. Now, in past years, this Black Lives Matter movement was often described as somehow a very liberal or militant or radical movement. Well, that's misleading, and it's also a tell if you hear people talk about it that way. Let's deal in facts. There's nothing radical about being against murder. Now, the movement is, of course, about more than one thing, but it focuses on and has continually catalyzed around something fundamental. And if you listen to its members in this movement and its leaders, you'll hear it. It's not complicated. They're demanding the state stop murdering black people. Let me repeat. They demand the state stop
Protect
murdering
me from
black people
everything,
and
past,
other
present,
innocent
and
people.
future.
And that means the arm of the state, the police, need to stop doing it. And when it does happen, if it does happen, that means other police need to do the bare minimum of their jobs, enforce the law, and cooperate with the law, and be against murder. I'm putting it bluntly because it needs to be clear, especially at a moment and time like this. So what we have here, this time, in this single case, is that more police than usual in America did do that, which is, of course, all they're supposed to do.
The defendant violated our policy.
Would this be authorized?
I would say no.
They could have ended their restraint. What is your, your view of that use of force being standard?
Totally unnecessary.
We're joined by retired NYPD Detective Mark Claxton, who's director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance and has worked tirelessly on so many of these issues. Thanks for being here for this discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Your thoughts about these points?
Significant points. Your monologue was very moving, to be honest with you. Just to answer some questions that you posed during the course of it, in regards specifically to the blue wall of silence, I don't believe that what occurred during the course of the Chauvin trial will have significant impact on what's called the blue wall of silence, mainly because it is just a component of a larger toxic police culture that is stubborn and resilient and really entrenched, and that supports the us against them mentality that police officers too often have, which gives police officers or allows police officers to believe that they're in a constant state of war against those out
I'm gonna stop recording
So
and
that
start
wall of
recording again.
silence